So do you think Mr. Wilson and Mr. Marazzo had the same goals as you in terms of ending the mandates?
No, I don't think so. I think their goals were ending the protests and getting everybody out of the city as quickly as possible. Because when I first met Tom Marazzo, he said to me, I thought we got somewhere. He said, listen, I'm just going to be here dealing with the trucks. I don't know who put him there. I don't, there was very fluid all the time. Okay, fine. He said, I'm going to be dealing with the trucks. I'm going to be a ghost. Nobody's going to know I was here. I will be invisible. And I thought, great, perfect. So finally, because every day we were dealing with different people setting up their own press conferences, we finally got that under control. I'm like, great. So I'll deal with the messaging. The trucks are parked, so I don't know what you want to do. You want to move trucks? That was a little suspect to me in the back of my head. But I just kind of left it there. And then the next morning, somebody comes into my hotel to tell me, Tom Marazzo, guess what he's doing? I'm like, what? A press conference. I'm like, it's less than 12 hours ago. He told me he's not going to, what is going on? And that's the cats we were trying to herd.
Mr. Dichter had asked that was primarily focused on Bitcoin. It was in the Sheraton Hotel, and I and Ms. Litch were asked to come to attend the first part of it, to provide a legal update and an operational update. Look at how much money actually got to the truckers and how much was actually returned to the donors. The vast majority ended up back at the donors, and as you know very well, otherwise it's in the escrow fund under court supervision, partly over which you must receive notice before anything can happen to it. So the money was symbolism in Tamara's view, and I think she's right. It was a way for Canadians to demonstrate and add their voice to what they thought the Convoy stood for, which was holding the government to account and advocating for respect for our charter, return to the rule of law.
Mr. Dichter was undermining the leadership, or at least in part.
Yeah, I've just never been able to understand Mr. Dichter. I mean, and the other thing is that he wasn't there that much because, firstly, he had left early before I arrived in late January, and he had had a car accident, I believe, near Kingston. And then he returned on the Friday, the 4th of February. And then early that evening at approximately 6 or 7 p.m., as he was leaving the front door of the Arc Hotel, he fell and badly broke his ankle. So then he was away at hospital for a period of time. Then he was restricted to his room because he just had a wheelchair and crutches. Then he had to go back for some surgery. So he was out of the loop a lot.
Right.
Friends, here at Rebel News, we are fiercely independent, as you know. We don't take a penny from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and we look to examine the other side of the story the mainstream media misses. But sometimes within our own work, there remains yet another angle in the story. As you know, we are vigorously covering the Public Order Emergency Commission in Ottawa right now. The commission is a fail-safe examination built directly into the Emergencies Act to prevent tyrannical, hypersensitive buffoons like Justin Trudeau from invoking the never-before-used counterterrorism law for political gain. As we know, Justin Trudeau did exactly that when he used the Emergencies Act to disperse peaceful anti-COVID mandate convoy protests that were in the streets of the nation's capital for nearly 4 weeks. As the convoy protests were happening, Rebel News was there on the ground, covering the protests firsthand, including talking to the entertaining cast of characters which made up the convoy leadership. You can see all of our coverage of that at convoyreports.com. Now, if you've been following along our coverage of the Public Order Emergency Commission at a special website, truckercommission.com, you'll know we've been regularly interviewing people from that aforementioned entertaining cast of characters. There's Keith Wilson, lawyer for the convoy, Tom Marazzo, Danny Bulford, Eva Chipiuk, another lawyer. But we haven't had a chance to talk to one that recently testified, Ben Dichter. By his own admission, Ben was in charge of the communications for the convoy, but he was also in charge of the cryptocurrency donations that flowed in to the convoy outside of the two major fundraisers of GoFundMe and GiveSendGo. I wanted to give Ben a chance to have his say while I put some of the most frequently emailed questions to me that you out there in TV land have said you'd like for me to ask BJ. I do not have a horse in this race. I know there are some competing versions of the events of the last days of the convoy. I think everybody has a right to be heard, and I think they have a right to have their version of events on the record. And so Ben and his lawyer, a familiar face to Rebel News viewers, Jim Karahalios, joined me in an interview we recorded quite early in the morning for me. And you'll see they did not shy away from a single question I put to them. Rebel News viewers are smart people, the smartest, I would suggest. And so you don't need me digesting the facts for you. You can make up your own mind, and it's my job to give you all the sides. Check it out. So joining me now is a convoy. I don't want to call you a convoy organizer. I'll let you identify yourself and your role within the convoy, Ben Dichter, but also his lawyer, Jim Karahalios. And, you know, people have a lot of questions. We can see there are sort of certain factions happening within the convoy. People are sort of regressing to their own corners. I guess that's what you get when you get a bunch of conservatives all together. We don't sort of march to the beat of the same drum. That's what makes us great, but also makes it hard to win elections. And there are some questions that I think a lot of people have about Ben and the convoy, and I want to assure the viewer the same way I assured Ben before we started recording. I don't have any preconceived notions. My mind is not made up, and that's not my role here. I just want to give everybody a chance to have their say, much the same way that we've had Tom Marazzo and Keith Wilson on our show. I want to give that same opportunity to Ben. So Ben and Jim, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I know that you guys are under a lot of scrutiny, and journalists can be scary, but I hope I'm not.
No, not at all.
Okay. Ben, tell me what exactly that you did within the convoy.
Tamara called me on January 15th and asked me to fill in the role of, spokesperson, press releases, media communication. I've known her the longest out of everybody. And she knew I was involved in producing podcasts, and I knew media. I knew a lot of people in media that I don't talk about frequently. And she wanted me to come on and try to get as much attention on the convoy, the fundraiser, which became the convoy as well, and get as much attention on it as possible. So I said, yeah. And I also told her, because she didn't know, I said, by the way, did you know I have a truck? And she says, get out. And I told her, yeah, I bought it a couple of years ago with my brother, and told her a little bit of the background. She knew exactly what I drove because her dad has a pilot company. So it was great. It's just kind of like the stars were in alignment for us.
So once the convoy came together, you started doing communications, although I don't think anybody really did anything in an official capacity within the organic movement of the convoy. It was just sort of people coming in from all directions because there was some momentum building behind that. Am I right to say that? I'm on the outside looking in.
Yeah, no. What she specifically wanted me was for that purpose, to try to aggregate a unified message for everybody and a unified goal, because agreed, there were all sorts of, it was a decentralized movement, if you will. And I said to her, okay, we'll put together a media strategy and how we want to communicate it to people, get everybody on side in a way that it's going to be effective. I knew the whole backstory behind the 2018 convoy with United We Roll, because she had explained it to me several years ago. And that's where, I put together, we got to communicate on the values of peace, love, unity, and freedom, and remain hyper-focused on ending mandates and ending the ArriveCAN app, right? And she agreed, and that's what we went forward with.
And there was just to jump in, there was, it's a matter of public record now, either in the inquiry or the class action that's going on.
Yeah.
The protest wasn't like one cohesive organization, obviously, but there were individuals like Ben, like Tamara, that came together to create what's now being called as the Freedom Corporation or the Freedom Convoy. And it's important to distinguish between that corporation that was created, the not-for-profit, to handle donations from the GoFundMe and the Give, Send, Go, and the protest. But obviously in the inquiry and in general, when people talk about it, they kind of mix the two things together, Convoy and the corporation. But there was cohesiveness amongst the 7 that you can see directors that initially, the initial directors of that not for profit, and largely, I don't see any kind of I don't know how you described it, Sheila, in your question, like factions or disagreement among those original seven. There hasn't been any, and in fact, Tamara, she obviously can't speak publicly because she has court charges pending against her, but in her testimony at the inquiry was entirely in simpatico with Ben's testimony. So I think some of the friction is coming from individuals that came later on, and it's unfortunate that the friction started in the testimony last week, where some individuals trying to look to assign blame to others. And it's good that Ben's able to had the opportunity as a witness to defend himself. And thanks for giving us the opportunity here, Sheila.
Yeah, you got it. That's what we do. We tell the other side of the story. So at some point, Ben, because I guess you know about crypto and I'm not. I think I'm 10 years too old to know about crypto. But at some point, not only were donations flowing into GoFundMe and then subsequently Give, Send, Go, but they were also flowing in as crypto. So that's really been some of the, I don't know, misinformation, gray area. You tell me you've been doing your best to sort of debunk some of those half-truths and rumors about the cryptocurrency that flowed into the convoy. So do we know how much came in, and then where has it gone, or how much was spent? Because we've been hearing allegations that a full accounting of the crypto has never been given. So please tell us where it is, what's happening with it.
Yeah, it was disconcerting during the actual protest, when certain people online who are in trouble and in jail right now were attacking myself and Tamara and saying, oh, they're stealing all the money, they're stealing all the Bitcoin, not crypto, by the way, Bitcoin.
I don't know.
And no, I know. I'm just telling you that because the Bitcoin people will love that. They'll understand that.
Perfect.
But anyway, so what happened was, they came to me, Nick came to me and said, a whole bunch of us are raising money. We set up kind of a GoFundMe equivalent online on a platform called Tallycoin. And we're going to we want to raise money for you. We've already, I think they had like $100,000 in there or something. It's a fraction of a Bitcoin. Sorry, it was, at that time, I think it was 2 Bitcoin. And then we ultimately managed to raise, if I remember correctly, approximately 21 Bitcoin, of which 15 of them were distributed directly to the truckers. That's the only money that got to them. And there's videos all over YouTube showing, one guy would actually be streaming when he showed up in his door and said, hey, we have Bitcoin here for you. I think the approximate value is like $8,000. And the guy said, no way, thank you. He's like, this is crazy. He said, no, what's crazy is you came down here and sat here for 3 weeks to try to save Canada. And we want to thank you for that. So he was ultimately raided by the OPP and the RCMP, and they brought in 15 officers, is what it required, to go into his house to steal his laptop and his 2 or 3 cell phones, to steal everything he had, and scare the hell out of him. They really scared him, the type of tactics that they used, and he didn't know what to do. He said, okay, here are my seed phrases. And that is very important. There was what's called a multi-sig wallet. Think of it as a bank account that requires multiple signatures to withdraw cash from it. That's what a multi-sig wallet is. And in this case, there were 5 signatures. I had just 1. So I submitted after the week of the 19th, which was a week of dealing with lots of lawyers, trying not to be arrested, by the way. And I submitted my seed phrase, or combination, if you will, to my lawyer, who was Keith Wilson. And he prepared an affidavit for it and then submitted it to the escrow agent. So I was shocked the day before. He says, I don't know what happened. Like, what are you talking about? You're the recipient of the seed phrase. And I said, it's in an email. Like, what's going on? I was so confused by it. Maybe he forgot. I don't know.
So obviously, when large sums of money are raised, like Tamara and Ben were the 2 individuals on the GoFundMe that raised almost $10 million. They were the co-sponsors on the GoFundMe page. And then when that got shut down, there was the Give, Send, Go. And then we had Chris Guerra with Adopt a Trucker. So you can't control trolls online who want to attack these individuals or make insinuations about what's going on. But what is now a matter of public record and is a lot of what Ben just said. And there, you know, you said in the beginning, Sheila, we're under scrutiny. We're not. Like it's all been laid out in the court. I think the only reason that there's an appearance of scrutiny is because, unfortunately, at the inquiry last week, Mr. Wilson, who represented most of the defendants, including Ben and Chris Guerra and Tamara and Chris Barber in the class action from, you know, January, February till about May, submitted a witness statement or an interview with the inquiry lawyers that is now filed as evidence, suggesting or insinuating that he doesn't know what happened to the Bitcoin. But he was the lawyer on the file and prepared with another lawyer in Ontario affidavits from Nicholas St. Louis, from Ben Dichter, from most of the defendants, and stating the following: that Nicholas had 3 of the 5 keys to the Bitcoin that was raised, and all of those assets were handed over to the court that are being held in escrow, and all those assets, including the money that was raised in Adopt a Trucker, GoFundMe, Give, Send, Go, whether they were in accounts or whether they were in Stripe, were all subject to repeat Mareva injunctions from the court when they were initially frozen, and then voluntarily they were, and all the defendants cooperated to put that money into escrow, and it's being held by a court-appointed escrow agent. So, you know, that was very unfortunate to see that being said under testimony and in a witness statement that's going to be filed at the inquiry as evidence, because if that was said outside of a public inquiry, Sheila, that is defamatory. And even worse, it's defamatory because the individual who stated that was the lawyer representing the individuals when all of the assets were turned over to the court escrow agent. So Mr. Wilson has the protection of testifying and providing that evidence in the inquiry because he's protected. But if he came in on your show and said that, he'd be at risk of defamation and legal challenges right away. And that's not to mention the fact that a lot of the stuff Mr. Wilson said, including the Twitter, was, you know, he obtained that information supposedly acting as the lawyer for all the directors of that Freedom Corporation. And I don't know about you, Sheila, but I've hired lawyers before. You covered me in 2018 when the PC Party sued me. And Ezra interviewed me when I had to sue the Conservative Party of Canada for their leadership when they wanted to hand it to Aaron O'Toole. Those lawyers that represented me in the past, they don't come out and throw me under the bus later and contradict what we put on the record, public record in court. So there wasn't any scrutiny and there wasn't any division amongst those 7 directors of the Freedom Corporation until I think that testimony was provided. And we're here answering the question that doesn't need really answering. I've submitted to you the affidavits. It's all on the public record what happened to the assets, all held in court.
Now, what did cause the falling out? Was it Keith Wilson's testimony? Did something happen sooner? What caused this? I mean, it's apparent. There's some friction between people who were on the ground during the convoy now. And, you know, I'm not really talking about the sort of fringe elements like Bridget Belton or Pat King for that matter. But, you know, between Ben and Tom Marazzo and Tamara, although it sounds like you still have a pretty cordial relationship with Tamara Leach, Keith Wilson, what happened there?
This is news to me because when we were there, wasn't, obviously a little bit of friction just because we were all dealing with so many problems, right? Like, and Tamara, the pressure she was under, she came into my room numerous times and said, I just need a hug. I just need to relax and hide here for a few minutes. And because she would step out and 30 people would throw something at her and make some demands. And I said to her at some point, I said, Tamara, we need to get you a handler. You can't have this. And she said, I know, but I want to be able to talk directly to people. So that's just kind of her style. But, you know, when people talk about friction, talk about divisions, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, we were all kind of working our best. And the perfect example was when I broke my ankle, and they carried me onto the couch in the Ark Hotel, waiting for the paramedics, which came within 30 minutes, by the way, and 20 minutes after I was in front of a doctor. So I don't know about this whole congestion thing. They all kind of hovered around. We had a little bit of friction in a meeting about an hour before, which is just the case. That's how truckers are. But we love each other, and they all came, and Chad sat with me, and Miranda was pumping me full of drugs. I don't even know what it was. Dr. What's his name? Dr. Hoskinson came down and he examined me, and he's got the best bedside manner I've ever seen in my life. And that was kind of the spirit that was there. Like, we were all together, and some narrative that we were that there was conflict. Like, I don't understand where that's coming from. I had my team in the media room where we were dealing with all the communications and press releases and all that sort of stuff. We were tight. Tamara and I must have talked or messaged each other, I don't know, 20, 30 times a day when she wasn't in front of me. And because we were kind of all in it together. Remember, we had the pressure of the world around us. It was the #1 media story on the planet. And like my Twitter and emails, everything was thousands of messages every hour. We just couldn't keep up, and all we had was each other. So yeah, there's a little bit of, no, let's not do this, let's do that. But we were all kind of in it together, as the lefties like to say, right?
I think if you also, look at the way the question's framed, and it's obvious why it's framed that way, because we're being presented with Mr. Wilson and Tom Marazzo as leaders of the convoy. But Tom Marazzo, in his own testimony, said he had a small role to play. And from what I could see, the only role that Tom had was to do his best impression of Neville Chamberlain and run off with Doug Ford's buddy, Dean French, and without telling the protesters on the ground, try to cut some secret deal with government officials that he was simultaneously and ever since been blasting on Twitter as institutions that have failed Canadians. But he felt it upon himself to go off with Dean French, Doug Ford's buddy, and Mr. Wilson and negotiate some kind of deal. But they weren't there originally, Sheila. And that's as per Tom's own testimony on the stand. He said, I had a small role to play in the protest. And outside of doing those negotiations with those same people that Tom on Twitter will say they're institutions that failed us, but under testimony said small role. Now, Derek Sloan might want to say that Tom had a super big role, and other organizations, because Derek's trying to fundraise and he wants to say that Tom had a big role. But of the 7 directors, including Chris Guerra, who was first on the ground, another item that's on the public record, there was no division. And the friction that we've seen in the testimony was natural friction that would take place among people, protesters who were under the threat of a lawsuit, not even a threat. It was actually filed, had the government on top of them, and had to take care of protesters on the ground. And it's unfortunate that, the question's phrased like that, because they want to spin it in a certain way where by Ben defending himself, that's division. But where was the division? It was when, unfortunately, Mr. Wilson took the stand on the Wednesday, the day before Ben was going to testify. Ben was on November 3rd. Mr. Wilson was the day before. And the lawyers supposedly representing the convoy organizers attacked Ben. Mr. Wilson suggested he didn't know what happened to the Bitcoin, which it's a matter of public record. He was the lawyer on the file when he submitted those affidavits on behalf of Nicholas St. Louis and Ben and the others, and it got handed over into escrow. And this idea that Mr. Wilson used this word sabotage of the convoy in testimony. I mean, mercy, like if he wasn't protected by the privilege of a public inquiry, I don't think he'd ever say that in public on a show with you. And so he injected all this division and hostility because the lawyers supposedly representing the convoy, even though they're not representing all 7 of the original directors, they're barely maybe representing the majority. And 2 of them, Tamara and Chris Barber, are silenced. They are trying to spin this narrative at the inquiry, which is different than what they were saying back in January and February. Remember, Mr. Wilson was saying this is a legal protest, and a judge stated in a decision it's a legal protest. That never happened, but that was Mr. Wilson's interpretation. Now he's trying to say it was chaos, and they went off on their own, those three individuals, to do their best Neville Chamberlain impersonation, cut a deal with the big bad government, and move trucks out of the way. So they've changed their story. They're giving justification at the inquiry for Trudeau's use of the Emergency Act. And it's a different story and a different script than they were telling the public and the protesters back in January and February. So if we're looking at any friction, it's by those people, Dean French, Tom Marazzo, Keith Wilson, that showed up after it started and have decided to announce themselves, in Keith and Tom's view, as the spokespeople for everything that happened. And it's not really on behalf of the original 7 directors, that's for sure, because Tamara backed up everything Ben said in her testimony.
I suppose that begs my next question then. You've mentioned the ongoing negotiations that were happening between Keith Wilson, Tamara Leach, the city managers. Jim Watson seems to have selective memory about where he became involved. He said he wasn't involved, but there's documents, from his office. But it seems as though, and again, I'm watching the testimony like everybody else.
Yeah.
And it seems as though there came a time in which you were sort of, even though you were in charge of communications, you were supposed to come up with a communication strategy. They cut you out of that part of everything. Jim disagrees, so I'm glad I'm asking this question, because as I say, on the outside looking in, it looks like they were doing things that you didn't know about, but you were supposed to communicate on behalf of the convoy to the public. So maybe you can clear that up for me. And Jim, I'm sure you've got something to say.
Well,
Yeah, we all
go ahead, Ben, because there's
we
stuff
all did
on the record there. Yeah.
Yeah, we all didn't know about it, in that, with this whole meeting with the mayor and whatever, none of us knew. They told us after the fact. Chad Eros will confirm that. And I think he even put it in his witness statement that when Keith came to me, he said, "Oh, we're gonna start negotiating with the city." I said, "No, you're not. No, you're not, Keith. That's the dumbest idea I've ever heard in my life. Just wait. The city told us where to park the trucks. Having somebody who worked for the government, I know how they operate. They're going to spend a week trying to figure out who to blame and who needs to talk to us. And then we'll start to communicate with them at that point. Just wait, just hold off." And he said, "No, but we need to show them, we need to show a sign of good faith." And I said, "No, we just need to wait. So Keith, do not do it." What he didn't tell me is he already started.
Got it.
Here, the facts are really clear, either that have been laid out in the inquiry. Ben reached out to Tamara and Mr. Wilson on the 14th with a text message or whatever it was, signal messages, and they both confirmed there's no deal. And in Mr. Wilson's text that responded, it was more rumors, suggesting that any talk of a deal was rumors for days or preceding the 14th. If they regret the decision to go off on their own, Tom and Keith with Dean French, if they regret that, because Dean French wasn't a supporter of the protests and has the phone number, seemingly, he suggests in a text message to Mr. Wilson, he has the phone number of Katie Telford and Doug Ford, obviously had a working relationship with both of them a couple of years ago. And maybe that was a terrible idea, to go off in secret and have discussions with the city. But how anyone could perceive that that was a negotiation between the city and the protesters, how can anyone look at Dean French and go, "Yeah, I think he represents the protesters. He's told the Toronto Sun he doesn't support them. He's buddies with Doug Ford and Katie Telford, or at least has their phone number. But, I'm going to take it at face value that Dean represents the protesters." I told David Menzies this, Sheila. It's like if Ben was negotiating with a rebel and I showed up to you and I said, "I'm here representing the CBC," you wouldn't take that seriously. But somehow they took it seriously. And then when word got out that discussion was happening, it obviously caused a lot of stress on the ground. And Randy Hillier, mirrored that stress in a text message. So maybe they regret it. Maybe it was a terrible idea. Maybe they don't want to be seen, Tom and Keith and Dean French, as the ones that were going without the moral support of the truckers and the protesters on the ground to have those discussions in the city. Maybe they now want to admit after the fact that the city had no authority and they had no authority to do those discussions. Maybe that's the reason why they want to take another script now. But back then, they were suggesting that it was a legal protest. Mr. Wilson is in articles saying that the judge in the class action said it's a legal protest. No judge ever said it was a legal protest, but he was encouraging people to go down to protest, and his interpretation was it was legal. And he said a judge made it legal. So why at the same time he was telling the protesters that and getting them to come down, was he off trying to quote unquote alleviate the pressure with someone like Tom Marazzo, who says he had no role or a small role, and Dean French, and now after the fact they're trying to blame it on other people? Well, it was their decision, and they didn't have the authority. And despite the fact that the lawyer of Keith said that they had a board resolution, they've never provided such a resolution to the inquiry as facts and evidence to say they had the authority, even on behalf of the corporation of 7 directors, to enter into those discussions. So that's all on the record.
Now, next question, and it's sort of along the lines of the Bitcoin rumors. There's a lot of rumors, Ben, around the reason you were never charged. And a lot of the other convoy organizers, they're all charged with mischief. Some of them have gag orders. And again, on the outside looking in, they were apparently, according to them, negotiating an end, or at least as Jim puts it, to alleviate the pressure. But they all got charged with mischief. You sort of wanted the convoy to continue, or at least not negotiate, and you didn't get charged. So I guess are you able to speculate about why you didn't get charged?
I can tell you exactly. Yeah,
I'm just going to put it right to you.
Yeah.
People say that you turned on them, that people say that maybe you informed on them. I don't know what you can inform on them,
my God.
but that's out there. It's on me to ask it. So please speculate as to why you weren't charged.
Yeah, listen, Ray Epps told people to go into government buildings. I told people to stay out of buildings and be kind to police and show them love, even when they're writing you a ticket, because they don't want to do it. I mean, for me, I have a brother who's a police sergeant, so I understand, the basics of what happens when they do crowd control. Because, when we go for family dinners, he's mentioned stuff like that. We talk shop a little bit. But this was, they even said it in the testimony this is the regular standard procedure. Pick off the leaders on the street when they're accessible, and that will help quash the movement. I was not accessible. I was in a wheelchair in a cast with a broken ankle. That's why. And, there were 7 directors, 2 got arrested. 5 of us didn't, as well as I don't know how many volunteers we had, 150. A few of them got picked up, but many people didn't. And I don't, it's interesting that there seems to be, this speculation all around exclusively myself, and I don't understand why. I was just in a hotel, and when on February 18th, Chris and Tamara were both arrested. So the road captains the next morning came to me. They came to my hotel room. And they said, a driver was pulled out of his truck the previous night, had guns drawn on him, thrown in the snow, and was arrested. And there seemed to be a vacuum for decision making, and that actually happened quite a bit, especially when our friends like me and Tamara did a lot of that. There was decision fatigue on her end, so many things she was bouncing off of me throughout the convoy up until she was arrested. In my promo video for my book, that picture of me and Tamara, that was the night she did her stream where she just broke down in tears from stress. That's what that was. So the road captains came to me and they said, what should we do? And I said, if it's getting violent, I don't know. If you're asking what I think, it's up to you. If you want to leave, tell me. That's the message I'll put out. It's up to you. And I think it was Bridget and Joe and Johnny and all the road captains were there. And they said, yeah, shockingly, they said, yeah, it's time to leave. And then Miranda said to me, but Ben, some of these truckers are not going to leave no matter what. And I said, Miranda, that's what leadership is. You need to communicate to them in a way that they will respond to you and know it's in their best interest. We've won. The government's getting violent. We have won. We don't want people to get hurt. And then about, I don't know, an hour later, because we had a quick meeting, they were calling liaison officers and all that sort of stuff. I got a call from Keith Wilson telling me, you have to leave the hotel. And I said to him, what do you mean I have to leave the hotel? Why? And he said, well, because you may get arrested. I'm like, Keith, I'm in a cast in a wheelchair. I'm not exactly a threat. I'm just doing communications. He said, no, you have to leave. You have to leave. You have to leave. And then he said to me, listen, the others may be subjected to a gag order and somebody needs to, speak for freedom. That's how Keith talks. And I'm like, being a little dramatic, Keith. He says, no, this is important. I said, fine. So I put out a tweet, which I should have done a thread. I tried to squeeze it all into one tweet, but so much stuff is going on all at once. And that's where I explained many of us are leaving. I was trying to refer to the road captains, but I couldn't get enough characters in one tweet. And then I was shocked. Ezra said, it looks like you ran. I'm like, my lawyer's just bugging me for the past 20 minutes. You got to leave. You got to leave. You got to leave. So what I did is I left just the hotel and I went to stay with a friend of mine in Ottawa, and I remained there until March 12th. I needed to get a cast off. I couldn't go even if I wanted to. But, the rumor mill spreads and people's imagination gets the best of them. And that's why it's just not accessible, because I couldn't get out on the street, with the exception of going on stage with Pastor Hildebrand and just giving a thank you to everybody for sacrificing their time and coming down to support us. I thought that was important. And that took me an hour. Every time I had to go there, it took an hour to get to the stage because the police didn't really seem to have much concern for somebody who was trying to crutch in the snow and ice. But I did anyways. It was important.
Matter of public record, Sheila, 2 people from the 7 directors of the Freedom Corporation were arrested. And that was Tamara and Chris. And their arrests had nothing to do with the fundraising or the protests. Their arrests had to do with after the emergency was put in place, the order of emergency by Justin Trudeau, they were on the street. And the other 5 directors of the Freedom Corporation haven't been charged. So it's not just Ben. And that includes Tom Marazzo, who wasn't a director. He hasn't been charged. Mr. Wilson hasn't been charged with anything. So it's a kind of weird, allegation to make against Ben. And it's not consistent. Like, the question's not consistent, because 2 of the 7 fundraisers, if you were to call them, directors of the corporation is the proper way to call them, have not been charged. And that's going to be an important issue to discuss in the class proceeding, obviously, and other proceedings. Like, I'm sure Tamara and Chris will bring it up in their criminal cases. I don't know who's representing them on those. And, if you go back to your question, Sheila, where you say, the allegation is someone provided information to government or the authority. We just talked about Tom Marazzo and Mr. Wilson going to secret meetings with the city and giving them information on the positioning of trucks in the protests. So if you were to venture a guess and ask a question, who's providing information, we don't even have to guess, because they've testified that Tom Marazzo's small role in the protests was to show up there, declare himself spokesperson on February 8th, and he immediately go into discussions with authority figures and give them confidential information as to the positioning of protesters. And this is someone who's, living off of an RCMP pension, military pension in his case. He's never been charged. And I've not heard his military pension being taken away. And he's admitted on the record, public record, that he was in backroom negotiations, discussions with the city, the former chief of police. And we don't know all of the discussions that were had, because all we have is some text messages between Dean and Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson said on the stand that his clients waived privilege for him to say that at the inquiry. But we don't even have evidence that all his former clients did waive privilege. So there's a lot of questions, and maybe the people that are asking the questions about Ben just don't want to ask the questions about those individuals who've admitted that they went off into secret discussions, and we don't have the transcript of those discussions, and we don't know what exactly was said.
And Sheila, just to add to that, when I left the hotel and arrived at my friend's house, that's when my credit card was frozen. So it's not just bank accounts, credit cards, lines of credit, corporate accounts, everything I had was frozen. And that entire week, I was dealing with 4 different lawyers because we didn't know if I was going to get an arrest because Nick received a warrant from the RCMP. The OPP seemed to be trying to bait me into surrendering the seed phrase I told you about to them, which would be in violation of a court order. It was the most stressful week of my life because every day I didn't know, are they going to try to arrest me? Are they not going to try to arrest me? Like, you know, from the outside, it's like, oh, Ben didn't get arrested. I'm like, hey, you wouldn't want to be me that week because that was not a week with many hours of sleep because I wiped my computer. I wiped my phones just because I don't know if somebody's going to come in with a warrant and want to take everything like they did to Nick. I got a hard drive. I wiped everything out because I didn't know I was in damage control, dealing with my lawyers telling me do this, this, and that. So it was really stressful.
My next question, do you think, Ben, that the convoy was a success in the end? Would you do it again if you could?
Firstly, 100% it was a success. Not only did we inspire 30 convoys from around the world, which we discuss in my upcoming book, Honking for Freedom, and the messages I got from all over the world, outpouring from so many different countries, it was absolutely amazing. That experience is what Jordan Peterson said to me, who, by the way, did the endorsement of the book. He explained to me after he reached out to the Dutch farmers, he said they looked at everything that went wrong with the Freedom Convoy, and they already organized, you know, a level of protections to ensure that they don't have what happened to us occur in the Netherlands. So the whole idea of trying to help inspire people to fight for their freedom around the world is a gift that I'm going to treasure for the rest of my life. And then also the fact that Doug Ford, remember, we were in hard lockdown in Ontario because of Doug. He was doing his Kathleen Wynne imitation or Justin Trudeau imitation, whatever you want to call it. And when we went to Ottawa, it was shocking because people weren't wearing masks. Not only did you have people from Quebec hugging people from Alberta and becoming friends and forming what I think are going to be long-lasting relationships, all these mandates on the provincial level, even as far as Vancouver, eventually were dropped with one exception. That is the federal government. They're the only ones that remained married to him, but everybody else understood that, okay, this is not gonna fly. So would I do it again for that purpose? I mean, it was one of the most exhilarating experiences of my life, and one of the most terrifying experiences of my life as well. But I met so many amazing people, and people are now willing to speak up. The normies, as we call them, who just watch, you know, legacy media, and they don't really pay too much attention to politics because they're busy raising their kids and focusing on their career. They're now starting to at least talk openly. They're at least willing to listen, which is why I wrote a book that's there to try to reach those people. Not only will it better inform you and everybody else on this side of the aisle that went on, but it's something we can give to people on the other side and say, read this. This is going to tell you the truth of what went on. Because I knew in this inquiry that we would have something, and I knew it'd be all politicized. And so it is what it is, but I wanted to have a record of account for it. So yeah, I'd do it again. It was amazing.
Probably not with the same people involved though.
Well, what I would do,
Dean Friend.
Everybody asked me, what would I do differently? I would have started with a legal team. Once I saw, when Tamara called me and said, you know, we got, I don't know what it was, $100,000 in the GoFundMe or something. She said, this is getting some traction. The first thing I would have said is, let's get a legal team. And I actually said that to Tamara when we were in the Swiss, the first day that we both got there, when we did the hour-long interview with you guys, which never aired. I don't understand why. But I have nothing to do with Rebels production, so I'm not going to pass judgment. But when I was in the Swiss hotel, I said to Tamara, listen, I'm not a rich guy. You're not a rich person either. but I know some very wealthy people. It's a different world. We need an investment banker who understands Swift. We need a couple of lawyers who are used to moving large sums of money. And because if not, this is now a political red potato, and we're going to get into trouble if we don't prepare properly. And she said to me, well, you know, Chad's our accountant. And I said, I love Chad, and me and Chad have a really very good relationship. All of us have started to come back together. And since the end of the convoy, and we're all, you know, going to get together at some point soon. But I said to her, I tried that with her 3 times, and, you know, she was overwhelmed. We were all overwhelmed. We would make decisions. We don't know if it's the right decision. And but it is what it is. And we tried our best. So I know next time around. But one thing's for sure, I would do it with Tamara in a heartbeat, because I love her like a sister. And this has been hard, because we usually would talk every couple of weeks, maybe once a month, depending how busy she was. This is the longest I've ever gone without speaking to her since I've known her. And it's too bad. I love talking to her.
Now, you declined a question from one of my journalists at the commission, and I am fiercely protective of my journalists.
Of course.
And
yeah.
it was a little prickly how you did it. Why did that happen?
I don't know, prickly. From my perspective, I'll tell you what happened. I walked out of the commission chamber, if you will. There were, 10, 15 journalists behind a rope or something, throwing questions at me. There was all at once. I didn't know who was saying what, and I was just exhausted. That process of being on stage, being the only person that didn't have, thankfully we found some ways for Jim to lead a few questions, but I was the only one that really didn't have standing and couldn't have somebody lead my questioning. So everybody was against me in that room. So I was just exhausted. I'm like, I just said later, well, let's talk later, just exactly like that. I went outside and I spoke to somebody outside. I can't remember the first person who talked to me for like 2 minutes. And I walked over to the curb, and there was somebody with a pride flag with a Hong Kong calling me a terrorist. So I went on Instagram and said, the Freedom Convoy protected this person's right to free speech, and we need to allow these people to speak freely as well as ourselves. Finished it. And then one of the people I was going for lunch with after, I think it was Amanda, said, she comes up to me, she says, Rebel Media wants to come for lunch. And I said, I'm so tired. I just don't want to do, I need to like decompress and relax. So I went up to her, she was with him, and I said, listen, I'm sorry, I just want to go for lunch, and take my email, send me an email, and I'll gladly do something, because I love you guys. I love Dave Menzies. He is my hero.
Who
Since
doesn't?
what he did at the city council thing. Like I've known David for years, and so there's no animosity. It's just I was so exhausted, and I just needed time not to use my brain for an hour, and that's all that was. It wasn't personal, and that's why I was surprised to hear the insinuation. And you can tell if my characterization of how I behaved is incorrect, then I apologize. I meant no animosity, other than the fact that I was just super stressed. But that's exactly how I said it. Just send me an email and we'll talk.
Well, and I hope this clears things up, because we do get a lot of your feedback saying, well, why didn't you put a question to Ben? Why didn't you put a question to Ben? And we're 48 minutes into asking questions of Ben.
And when I saw that they were all clumped, I don't know why the government does this. They take all the media and they squeeze them all together, so I couldn't see who was who, because it was far off. It was 30 feet away, and just it nothing personal.
Yeah.
One thing's for sure, I wouldn't have gone to legacy media. That's for sure.
No, I get that. Ben and Jim, I want to thank you guys so much for your time. But before I let you go, Ben, you've got a new book coming out. You tell me that Jordan Peterson has written the foreword. Tell us a little bit about it. You touched on it just briefly. Tell us a little bit about the book and where people can get it.
Well, Jordan Peterson, we didn't put a foreword in. He wrote the endorsement on the back. But the book it's all the good things. There's a little bit of friction in it, but I wanted it to be a positive story for people to understand how an amazing moment this was. The cover was taken by Luciano Cherubino, who was there for 3 weeks. He took 12,000 pictures. And if you can see it, That was the spirit of the Freedom Convoy. People first coming together. The trucks were in the background. And I tell many stories here. It's not, there's chapters that I'm not even in it. I tell the story from Dave live from the shed when he was raided and the police brought in automatic weapons. And the only legacy media news outlet that believed him and came to his defense, believe it or not, was the New York Times, shockingly. So we tell his story. We tell the story of driving across the country from other people's perspectives. So it's not just the, it's not just the Benjamin Dichter story. It's mine, obviously, but everybody else that we wanted to get. And we did 2 months worth of interviews and trying to put this all in chronological order to ensure that it's factual and it is the truth of what went on there. And I think everybody's going to love it. Honkingforfreedom.com. Honkingforfreedom.com. And for my American trucker friends, that I got a bunch of them now since the convoy, if you drive a truck in the US, you understand why you don't like Amazon. If you go to their depot and they tell you you got 20 minutes and you're there for 14 hours, there's a reason for that. Truckers don't like Amazon. So we're putting it on 4 different platforms. You'll be able to get it. You get a hard copy like this or digital copy. Amazon, Kobo, ebook it, and Etsy are the platforms we're releasing on it right now. And it'll be available on Remembrance Day. And that is for a reason.
Well, guys, I want to thank you so much. Jim, is there any legal points that you want to make before we close the interview? No?
No, I think we covered it all. There's an ongoing class action against many of these individuals. And, someone watching the inquiry and Ben defending themselves might get spun a certain way, but the defendants might have different lawyers, but they're all defendants in the class action, and they have similar interests in defending themselves and defending those who attended the protest in spirit and donors. And it's unfortunate that, at the inquiry, 1 or 2 people decided to try to change the narrative and make allegations against others. And we appreciate the fact that you gave Ben the opportunity to defend himself. And we're lucky that the commission summoned Ben so he could provide his version of events. But this is not a joke, right? Like, it's one thing to attack me or Belinda leading into a provincial election. You kind of, many will say, well, Jim asked for it. No one told Jim to go run. But when you're a lawyer, or when you're Tom Marazzo and you're called to testify and you're putting yourself out there as leaders of a protest, and under oath, you say things that you wouldn't say without the protection of a public inquiry, and you try to, say things about Ben or anyone else that are contradictory to the public record, and trying to justify Justin Trudeau's call of an emergency because of one tweet, which is ridiculous. That crosses the line. It's not a joke. It's not votes at a ballot box. And we appreciate the fact that you gave Ben the opportunity to clear the record, because division is being hurled at some people by those who want to be in control of the microphone and the message.
And that tweet, by the way, was a response to thousands of attacks of Tamara primarily, and making the accusation that she stole the money, she stole she didn't know anything about Bitcoin, she stole that, and she lied to us. She said she promised us gas money. We're going to sue her. We're going to come after her because we came across the entire country, not for 2 days and whatever. That's why I had to put that out there to calm the waters, because people were fueling the attacks against primarily her and myself secondary.
It's just a big mess, but at the end of the day, we cannot lose sight of the fact that our prime minister invoked and never before used counterterrorism law on peaceful protesters in our nation's capital. And where else should you go to protest the federal government peacefully but the nation's capital? And
what did we do wrong? Park some trucks in the city?
Extended
so we brought
traffic snarl.
Yeah, crazy, just crazy.
Well, guys, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're very busy. Ben, you've got a bunch of interviews today. And Jim, you do everything every single day. So I just want to appreciate you taking the time to put your side of the story on the record. And let's hope people make up their own minds.
Thank you, Sheila.
Thanks, Sheila.
Thanks. To see and support all of our independent, on-the-ground coverage from the Public Order Emergency Commission, what we're calling the Trucker Commission, please visit truckercommission.com.